Today I'm learning about Napoleon's masterpiece. I mean, how stupid is this? Gosh, I can't even imagine. Boney, the Corsican ogre. Okay. Okay, so we are back straight from the French Revolution videos. If you haven't seen those, go check them out, starting with part 1. We're jumping back into this Napoleon series. It's one of my most requested series so far on this channel. I have to say, I've really been enjoying learning more about Napoleon. In fact, I even bought this book about Napoleon. I haven't gotten too far into it. It's like 800 pages long, but I'm even thinking about doing some videos on this book. Maybe after like I read a chapter or something, we can get on here and discuss it. Maybe even do like a live Q&A about it, so we can do like a real-time talk. I don't know if that's something you'd be interested in. Let me know in the comments. I've never done a live stream on this channel before, so maybe that could be like one of the first ones we do. And I really enjoy reading your comments, so I picked a few of them as kind of a lead-in to this video. So our first comment comes from Fred Barker, and he says, although he's the greatest commander in history, Napoleon is not just about war, he's also one of the most important legal and political reformers of all time. Now, I've had a lot of you guys tell me this about Napoleon, so I'm hoping that this book will tell me more about that, because I hear that this epic history series that we're going through doesn't really get into some of the more like legal and civil stuff that he did. Our next comment comes from Chris A, and they said that yes, Napoleon defended the revolution in the beginning, but later cast that aside and became emperor himself, which basically made him a king. So he basically used the revolution to further his own military career and then abandoned it and created the French Empire. So now I really do understand more of this now that I've watched the French Revolution videos. They kind of led into this Napoleon series, so it just goes to show that Napoleon was an opportunist. Our next comment is from Frasco or Frasco, I'm not sure how you say that exactly, but he went through and answered a bunch of my different questions that I had. And so he did say that the old Spanish flag that I had brought up, I wasn't quite sure which one of the flags was the Spanish flag that we were watching. Basically, he implied that they used the wrong flag and that they should have used this one. So I'll be looking for a red X or a red cross, or a red X with a cross or something like that as the Spanish flag that they are using in here. So our next comment is from Malcolm Stratham. He says that I should watch the British TV series Sharp. Malcolm, you are not the only person that brought this up to me. I had like probably 10 or 12 other people bring it up. I did look it up briefly online to see what it was, and it looks like basically a mini series. They're really long. They're like almost 2 hours long, so I don't think that would work for YouTube, but I would actually enjoy watching some longer form stuff with you guys. I've actually had people request that I watch some World War II stuff that are really long mini-series as well. So I'm kind of floating around the idea of maybe starting a Patreon for stuff like that. So if that's something that you guys might be interested in, let me know as well. Chunming Chan says that Prussia is one of the many German states and the leading kingdom of the future German Empire. So basically I learned that Prussia is modern day Germany and also maybe partially Poland as well. So that's good to know. So Professor Bernard made a really good comment down here. He said that essentially all of Northern Europe were monarchies and they were all related, and France having a revolution really threatened them. And so all of the surrounding countries around France took it as seriously as the US would have with Mexico and Canada going communist during the Cold War. So yeah, I get it. But I also think that this is one reason why Napoleon and the French Revolution aren't as prevalent here in the States, and that's just because we're on the other side of the world from it. So I had a question about the howitzer that was brought up during my last Napoleonic Wars video, and Marcus Wardle along with a few other people let me know that a howitzer is a short cannon designed to fire a projectile in an arcing trajectory. They became popular during World War I as artillery was required to get up close to the front line trenches and fire into the opposing trenches, which makes sense. And he says that cannon fire is more of a flat trajectory. But that's really interesting that it took him until like World War I to become popular, and here they're being used over 100 years prior to that. So was there just like not much of a need for a howitzer at this point in warfare? And if there was, what prompted it to be invented? What was it about this type of warfare where they needed something that had more of an arc to it? I think I'm actually going to do a video on howitzer and kind of like the history of it and what it is, because I've heard about it a lot in military videos and stuff, but I've never really known what they were talking about. Now, I did say in my last video that the American army to me seemed to be way outclassed by the British and the French, But Derek Laker let me know not to underestimate the American war machine during the Revolutionary War. All American revolutionaries were trained by the British and the French and the Spanish forces that occupied the Americas, not to mention the Germanic and other European mercenary groups that immigrated to the New World, and George Washington was an officer in the militias under the British jurisdiction that initiated the French and Indian War. I did know that he was a British commander at one point, and I do know that some of the European armies did start to train the American army, but still, I mean, they wouldn't have been anywhere as experienced as some of these soldiers that were coming from France and Britain. Plus, I've always been taught as well that the American army learned a lot of guerrilla warfare tactics from the Native Americans, and so they used that sometimes against the British during the war, which I guess is kind of smart if you can use the terrain that way in your favor. And finally, last but not least, I have a comment here from a fellow American called Flying Eagle, and he says that as a fellow American, I definitely understand not knowing much about Napoleon. Even as someone who did well in school and studied a lot of history, it just wasn't much of a focus. So yeah, I kind of made this point in one of my earlier videos that Americans just aren't taught very much about Napoleon. And again, it's one of those things that I just said. It was more of a European matter, and America, I think, just didn't want to get involved at that time. We had our own thing going on over here. And I feel like even today, Americans still feel very kind of far removed from what happens over in Europe and on your side of the world over there. It's just a geography, honestly. So anyway, that's kind of my pathetic way of trying to explain why Americans don't know much about this stuff, or why we might seem a little bit more isolated to you guys over in Europe. So anyway, please don't take my comments the wrong way. I'm not trying to be condescending or critical of you guys or whatever. I'm just trying to explain things. I'm just trying to explain. Okay, so I know this was a long intro, but I really wanted to highlight a lot of you guys in my video with your comments and let you know that I really am paying attention to them and I am trying to learn from you. So we're going to go ahead and get into this video now. We're watching Napoleon's masterpiece, Austerlitz, 1805. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I have no idea where in the world Austerlitz is. Maybe it's in Austria, or what would become Austria.
In December 1804, in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, Napoleon Bonaparte crowned himself Emperor of the French. Europe had never seen such a sudden and dramatic rise to power. A son of impoverished Corsican nobility to military dictator of France in little more than 10 years. Revolution and war had cleared Napoleon's path to the throne.
Yeah.
War would dominate his 10-year reign. A conflict unprecedented in history that would leave millions dead and a continent in turmoil.
When it says this is unprecedented in history, is that also taking World War II into account as well? Because I thought World War II was considered like the most devastating war, at least in more recent times. So is this worse than that? I don't know.
Eight months after Napoleon's coronation, the French Empire and its Spanish ally were at war with Britain, and Napoleon had assembled an army of 180,000 men along the Channel coast. But as long as the British Royal Navy ruled the seas, invasion was impossible. But nor could Britain challenge France on land. And so British Prime Minister William Pitt tried to build a European coalition against Napoleon.
Who will join our war against Boney, the Corsican ogre? Okay. Was that an actual nickname that Napoleon had? I didn't know that the British were not considered as strong as France on land. I thought the Brits were kind of like all around really strong.
British Prime Minister William Pitt tried to build a European coalition against Napoleon, using diplomacy and gold. Britain would prove Napoleon's most steadfast enemy, and its press delighted in relentless mockery of the French Emperor.
All these political cartoons.
Britain and France were old rivals in Europe and overseas. But now, Pitt feared Napoleon's conquests had made France too powerful. The French Emperor had to be defeated, and Europe's balance of power restored if there was ever to be lasting peace. Pitt found willing...
So, I'm sorry I keep pausing it again. This is just, I've got to ask this stuff or I'm not going to remember it. So, did Britain kind of see itself as wanting to restore peace in Europe at that point? Was that kind of like what they felt their role was in this?
If there was ever to be lasting peace. Pitt found willing allies in Europe, among monarchs who despised Napoleon as a product of the French Revolution and a dangerous threat to the existing order. Austria harboured the deepest grievances, having seen her influence in Germany and Italy steadily eroded by French victories. The final straw came in May 1804, when Napoleon had also crowned himself King of Italy in Milan.
What?
Austria, Russia, Sweden and Naples joined Britain in an alliance known as the Third Coalition, and devised an ambitious plan for a series of joint offensives against France. The main attack would be made by a combined Austro-Russian army, advancing across the Rhine into France. But Napoleon got word of their plans, and reacted with typical speed and decision. He was determined to strike first, before the Allies could join forces, and ordered his army, now renamed La Grande Armée, to march to the River Rhine. His target was the Austrian army of General Mack, which had made a premature advance against Bavaria, a French ally, and was now dangerously isolated from the other Allied armies. Napoleon ordered Marshal Murat, his famously flamboyant cavalry commander, to make feint attacks through the Black Forest, while the rest of his army, advancing at speed, enveloped Mack's army from the north.
I've had you guys ask me to do the series on the marshals. I'm assuming that Napoleon's marshals are basically just some of his main, like, military men that kind of made a name for themselves also. Also with this, I'm just kind of seeing, like, the long history of European wars, because to me, the Rhine River, I know that from World War II, but just to think that so many wars have been fought over that river, it's just kind of surreal to think about, actually. How many armies must have crossed that river? And I'm sure it's like that all over Europe too. I mean, it's not just the river, it's like that all over the continent.
Enveloped Mack's army from the north.
What's going on in
That
Bavaria?
summer, Napoleon's Grande Armée was at its most formidable. Well-trained, highly motivated, its regiments at full strength. What's more, it had been newly reorganized according to the corps system, later imitated by virtually every army in the world. Each corps, commanded by a marshal, was a mini-army of 15 to 30,000 soldiers, with its own infantry, cavalry, artillery and supporting arms, such as reconnaissance, engineers and transport. This meant each corps could march and fight for a limited time independently.
Yeah. Okay, so Napoleon is the inventor of the Corps, basically. So when we say Marine Corps over here in the United States, like, that's a Napoleon influence. Am I getting that right?
Could march and fight for a limited time independently, allowing Napoleon to break with the old doctrine of keeping his army concentrated and advance with his corps widely dispersed.
I didn't even know that that was a thing. I figured that this was always the way it was.
His real objective, and increased movement speed, because the army could advance along multiple roads and live off the land, taking its supplies from scattered villages, rather.
So, I thought that this was always the way that wars were fought. So you're telling me that back before this, armies would just all, like, stick together in one big clump, I guess, for lack of a better term? I could see why that would be extremely limiting. If that's the case, I'm really, really shocked that it took humanity this long to figure this out, because this seems like just a very basic thing that you would want to do in war, is to kind of, like, move your forces to different strategic locations, but I don't know, maybe the capability to do that wasn't really there prior to this? That doesn't make sense to me, though. I feel like I'm missing something here, so let me know what I'm missing or if I'm getting this right, because this is nuts to me.
And live off the land, taking its supplies from scattered villages, rather than relying on slow-moving supply wagons. When the enemy's main force was located, the army could quickly concentrate for battle. This is how Napoleon's army was able to move at a speed that often surprised and disorientated his enemies.
That's crazy to me.
Mack
that was
didn't
like
realize the danger he was
so
in
innovative.
until it was too late. Napoleon's fast-moving corps crossed the Danube behind him and surrounded his army.
So did Mack not take Bavaria? I thought
Mack
he did.
launched a series of poorly coordinated counterattacks, but despite some desperate fighting, the Austrians couldn't break out of the trap. Mack hoped that Kutuzov's Russian army could arrive in time to save him, but the Russians were still 160 miles away. And so, at Ulm, on the 19th of October, just 6 weeks into the war, Mack surrendered his army to Napoleon.
That point, about 160 miles away, I didn't think about that. How long it must have taken for them to travel at that point, because they didn't have motorized vehicles, so they would have been traveling on foot or by horse, which is one reason why I would think that the corps system would have already been in place, because it would take forever to move an army from one location to another. So spreading them out makes sense to me, to kind of cover more ground more quickly. But also this guy in the front right here, kind of on the right, he looks 100% like Elvis Presley.
I'm all shook up.
The French took nearly 60,000 Austrian prisoners, and Napoleon had struck his first devastating blow against the coalition. Russian General Mikhail Kutuzov was an experienced and wary commander, more cautious than Mack. His army was exhausted after its 900-mile march from Russia, but hearing of the Austrians' surrender at Ulm, and knowing he wasn't strong enough to face Napoleon alone, he immediately ordered a retreat. Napoleon pursued. The Russians fought several sharp rearguard actions, but could not save the Austrian capital, Vienna, which the French occupied on the 12th of October. Kutuzov slipped away to Olmütz in today's Czech Republic, where he was joined by reinforcements, as well as Emperor Alexander of Russia and Emperor Francis of Austria in person. Napoleon was furious that Kutuzov had escaped. By now his army was also exhausted, and far from home, with winter approaching. He needed to force a decisive battle quickly. Fortunately for him, the overconfident 27-year-old Russian emperor sought the glory of battle, overriding the concerns of his veteran commander, General Kutuzov. With the Allied army closing in, Napoleon ordered his corps to rapidly concentrate on a battlefield he had carefully selected, near the town of Austerlitz. Napoleon oversaw the dispositions of his army late into the night, then grabbed a few hours' sleep beside a campfire. Dawn would mark the first anniversary of his coronation as emperor, and promised a battle that would make or break his young empire.
Let us finish this one with a thunderclap.
The morning of the 2nd of December 1805 was cold and bright with a heavy mist. Two armies of near equal size faced each other across a 7-mile-wide battlefield. But the Allies held the high ground of the Pratzen Heights, while French Third Corps under Marshal Davout was still marching to the battlefield. Seeing Napoleon's thinly stretched right flank, the Allies planned a large-scale attack from the Pratzen Heights to steamroller the French right, before swinging round to envelop Napoleon's army. Little did they know, Napoleon was counting on his weak right wing luring the Allies into just such a move.
I was gonna say, somebody as shrewd as Napoleon surely would figure out that that's exactly what they were going to do. As soon as he said that, I was like, yeah, this is not gonna work. Napoleon totally knows that that's what you're going to do.
Whereupon he would launch his own attack on the Pratzen Heights to cut the Allied army in half.
What goes around comes around,
His
right?
bold plan relied on his correct prediction of Allied movements, the speedy arrival of Davout's Third Corps on his right, and a perfectly timed counterattack. The battle began around 7 a.m. as Austrian troops of General Kienmayer's advance guard clashed with French troops defending the village of Telnitz. In the face of overwhelming odds, the French fought stubbornly and bravely, but gradually they were forced back. But the Allies, instead of carrying out their great enveloping attack, did nothing. The morning mist and the late arrival of orders had led to confusion and delay, and it was another hour before the first 3 Allied columns were on the move. Soon fierce fighting erupted around Sokolnitz village and castle. Marshal Davout's corps, which had just force-marched 70 miles in 2 days, now arrived to strengthen the French right wing. Around 9 a.m, his lead infantry brigade appeared suddenly through the mist and retook Telnitz, before being driven back in turn by Austrian hussars. 2 more of Davout's brigades reinforced French troops at Sokolnitz. As the mist began to clear, Napoleon saw that, as he'd hoped, the Allied left was moving off the Pratzen Heights.
I mean, how stupid is this? I guess in real time this seemed like a smart move for the Austrian army, but I'm just looking at it on the map like this, and there's nobody left to confront Napoleon's army. Like, they just left themselves completely exposed. This Austrian commander was not too bright, it looks like to me.
And he ordered Marshal Soult's 4th Corps to begin its attack. To the alarm of Allied commanders, 2 French infantry divisions, until now hidden by the mist, were suddenly seen advancing straight towards the Allied centre.
I mean, there's no
General
way.
Kutuzov was forced to hurriedly organize a defense of the heights, using troops of 4 column. 2 hours of bloody fighting followed. Musket fire was so rapid and furious that both sides were soon low on ammunition and turned to the bayonet.
I'm just looking at this picture right now, and it looks so different to battlefields that we have today, obviously because of the line formations. That's why I guess when you look back at like old paintings and drawings of wars that are depicted, it just seems like this huge, glorious mess of a battle, you know? I mean, what a sight this must have been.
By 11 a.m, the French, with the advantage in training and discipline, had secured the heights and driven a deep wedge into the Allied position. To the north, a giant cavalry battle developed. While a Russian force from General Bagration's advance guard captured the village of Bosenitz, before it was halted by cannon fire from the Santon Hill. A decisive charge by 6 regiments of French heavy cavalry finally drove back the Allies, allowing Marshal Lannes' 5 Corps to move forward and seize Blasowitz and Krug. Now, Grand Duke Constantine, commanding the Russian Imperial Guard, led forward this last Allied reserve in a desperate bid to reclaim the Pratzen Heights.
Where are you going?
A battalion of the French 4th Line Regiment was charged down by Russian Guard cavalry.
This makes me sad. I'm an animal lover, and I understand that horses were necessary in war back then because they didn't have, you know, tanks and stuff like we have today. But it just makes me really, really sad for the horses. I know I'm being like a soft animal lover right now, saying that. I don't know, maybe some of you guys feel the same way, but putting like innocent animals in harm's way like this, just, I don't know. I just hate the thought of it.
Losing its eagle standard in bloody fighting. Napoleon, who'd moved up to the heights, sent in his own guard cavalry. In this grim melee between the elite horsemen of both armies, the French finally prevailed. Napoleon had broken the Allied centre. Now, to close the trap on the Allied left wing, still locked in heavy fighting around Sokolnitz. Around 2 p.m, Napoleon ordered 4 divisions to swing south and cut off their retreat. General Buxhowden, commanding the Allied left, only now saw the danger he was in.
I mean, come on.
Attacked from 3 sides, the only escape was south. Many of his troops were forced to flee across frozen ponds.
Oh. I'm sure they were slipping and sliding around on that one.
Opened fire, trying to smash the ice with their cannonballs.
Oh my gosh, I want to see this.
200 men and dozens of horses drowned in the freezing water.
Okay, never mind, I don't want to see this.
But not the many thousands of Napoleon's propaganda. The French Emperor had won a brilliant victory. His army had taken more than 10,000 prisoners and captured 45 enemy standards. Thousands of dead and wounded of all sides littered the battlefield. Many left untended for days.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine that. I mean, what if you're like seriously injured, you know, you've got a stab wound or a gunshot wound or something like that, and you're just lying there in the field, bleeding out, or, you know, gosh, I can't even imagine. So casualty estimates, yeah, the Allies got the way worse end of the deal on this.
The Battle of the Three Emperors, as it became known, was a crushing blow to the Third Coalition. As Russian forces retreated back to Russia, Francis I of Austria was forced to accept a humiliating settlement with France, agreeing to pay a 40 million franc indemnity and give up more territory in exchange for peace. But meanwhile, news had reached Napoleon of a disastrous Franco-Spanish defeat at sea off Cape Trafalgar. British Admiral Lord Nelson, at the cost of his own life, had masterminded a victory so complete that it ensured British naval dominance not just for the rest of the war, but for the next 100 years. Britain, master of the sea, Napoleon, unbeatable on land. The whale and the elephant, neither able to challenge the other in its own domain.
Yeah, it's crazy.
When William Pitt received news of Napoleon's victory at Austerlitz, he's supposed to have said, "Roll up that map of Europe. It will not be wanted these 10 years." A month later, Pitt was dead. But his warning that Europe...
Who was dead?
A month later, Pitt was dead.
Oh, really?
But his warning that Europe faced another 10 years of war and upheaval was to prove prophetic.
Alright, so there we have it, Napoleon's masterpiece, and I kind of understand why they call it his masterpiece now, because it looks like he pretty much flawlessly executed his battle plan. He successfully predicted what the Austrians were going to do, and I suppose the Russians as well that were kind of fighting with them. So I'm kind of starting to see how Napoleon was a bit innovative here. It still seems really bizarre to me that he's the one that came up with the corps system where he kind of split up his army into smaller armies and they kind of spread out. That just seems like a common sense thing that would have happened before this point. Maybe some other armies in history had done something similar similar to that, but maybe not quite the same way, I don't know. But then that might just be my modern sensibilities and how we know to fight wars today, trying to apply that to this time period. So there were a couple of small things mentioned in there that kind of stuck out to me, like the cavalry, horsemen. I never really kind of thought before about how they might have to train their horses in warfare and the different sort of strategies and maneuvers that the cavalry might have, kind of similar to what the infantry had. So I think that would be really interesting to learn about, is kind of the cavalry and how they handled their horses. At the same time, I really kind of don't want to do that because I'm sure that's going to involve learning about how horses got killed and stuff too, so... And also that thing at the end where he talked about Admiral Nelson of the British Navy and Trafalgar. Yes, I actually really do remember studying that in history. His name was familiar to me, believe it or not. So yeah, it looks like we might be getting into more of the naval stuff coming up, which I'm looking forward to because I'd like to learn more about that. So anyway, I really enjoyed that video. I'm looking forward to what's next in the rest of this series. Oh, Roger, what did you think? Did you enjoy this video? And if you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe. We've got the rest of this series coming, so don't worry about it. I am going to do every single video in this series. A lot of you guys seem to be worried that I'm not going to do that for some reason. I don't know why. And also, if you could answer any of my questions or if you want to add stuff to our discussion, please do that down in the comments. I really appreciate your input on this stuff. So that'll do it for the Battle of Austerlitz. At least I know where that is now. It's in like the modern day Czech Republic. Or is that right? The Czech Republic? Or... Alright, so I think we're done. I've been talking for a really long time now, so I really appreciate you guys watching and supporting this channel. We hit 4K subscribers today. I literally started this channel 7 weeks ago, and I never thought that I would have 4,000 subscribers 7 weeks later. I know 4,000 isn't a lot, and I know that's a really small channel still, but it surpassed my expectations, and it's all thanks to you guys. So hopefully we'll keep growing and trending in the right direction. And in order to do that, I've got a lot more coming, so stay tuned, and we will see you next time.